Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees, which brings together diverse and unique voices from around the world to share their stories. If you like today's episode, remember to give us a like, subscribe, and leave a review. Here's your host, David Shunk.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Voice of Adoptees. I'm here with our next guest, Kelsey. Kelsey's a good friend of mine. I've known her for about 10 years now. Whether that's fortunate or not, she'll tell you. Kelsey, say hello and let's hear your story.
Hello. How are you, David?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good.
So let's
All
talk
right.
about your adoption story. I'll let you take it away.
Sure. All right. So I'll kind of do a little introduction. Hi, my name is Kelsey. My birth name was, I'm sorry, I do not have a Russian accent, so this is going to sound very bad, but it was Svetlana Patashkina. I was born in St. Petersburg. I was born in 93 and then came to America in 1996. So a general idea. Basically, I'm going to just share my story. I'll try not to take up all the time. But so there are 5 siblings. We are all half siblings. So basically, unfortunately, my birth mom, her name was Tatiana. She was an alcoholic. As many of you know, those were very hard times in the 90s in Russia. So basically, let me see. So with kind of my birth family, it's actually a very interesting story. But back in 2017, I was very interested in my adoption and finding out who my siblings were. I was actually very surprised, but at 18, my adoptive parents had handed me over my adoption papers, which actually came with a lot. So I was looking through them, and on the papers, well, actually the one page, I was actually surprised, but it had all our names with our birth years. So I was actually very surprised, but my siblings were on those papers. So I was like, oh my gosh, like that's actually rare, because most people say, oh, well, I can't find my siblings.
Yeah, that's true.
I've talked to people that are like, wait, how have you gotten your siblings on the paper? Mine's never done that. And I was like, I don't know if that was actually planned. If my birth mom wanted us to basically reunite and know who we were to each other.
Right.
So I was like, all right, you know what? So I've known David a long time. And so David was like, oh, like, here's the site VK. And I was like, okay, cool. So I checked it out. I signed up. I was like, you know what? It's basically the Russian Facebook. I was like, let me just give it a shot and type in my brother's name, Denis Patashkin. So I typed in his name, and I'm not gonna lie, he did not look like me. Okay. I was a little like, this is weird. Like, all right, you know what? I'm going to go with my gut, and I'm just going to type him a message. So I wrote him a message explaining the whole story, saying, you know, my name is Svetlana Patashkina. I was adopted in 1996. I have one sister and 3 other brothers. And he wrote me back, and he was like, this is exactly correct. I was like, wait a second. I actually got a response. And I was just like, whoa, wait a second. I was in shock, to be honest. I was like, oh my gosh.
So how old were you when you did this? Let's back up a little bit. You did say that, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were handed the papers when you were 18.
Yes.
Right? Now, was this just because you weren't curious until that age, or did your adoptive parents not want you to see this information?
So it's kind of because I think with me being 18, they were like, all right, I think she has more of an understanding of her adoption. I think, you know, a lot of times with adoption, it comes with so many questions. So, you know, all of a sudden I might go running back to them. Why'd you, like, you know, start blaming them possibly? Well, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? And then it just, sometimes I don't know. So it depends on the situation. But for me, my parents were like, all right, well, we know that you understand your adoption fully now. So they felt like basically that they were like, all right, you know what? We feel comfortable with giving you the papers.
Now, I have a follow-up question from that. You talk about your adoptive parents said that they're comfortable with you with this information now. Did you previously ask them growing up questions about your adoption, or did you know you were adopted growing up?
So I did know I knew that I was adopted, but I was never curious until I got older.
Yep.
About I would actually say around 18. I wasn't,
Yeah,
you
that
know.
that that was the same with me. I mean, I always knew I was adopted as well, but just people ask me, because I'd say, oh, I waited till I was 18, and they automatically assume, well, is it because your parents didn't let you? And I'm like, no, it's just I could go into the safe, take out the documents anytime, and I did a few times growing up myself. And my adoptive mom did the best she could explain to me that the times are tough, and even I still remember when I was a kid, like really small. I remember her telling me like it was really poor, the country was going through bad times, and to put it to like a 7-year-old 6-year-old kid, your mom over in Russia was poor and she couldn't afford you, and luckily we were able to find you and bring you to our family, and here you are today. But that's a really interesting that you waited to kind of the same time I did. That's interesting.
Yeah, and then also it just, I don't know, like I know for some people, like you said, with being younger, it's going to leave you with a lot of questions that it just might open to different wounds, as I'm going to put it. And then you just don't know how to process that when you're younger. And so
Right.
to me, when you kind of wait till you're older and you can understand, like you said, why we got put in the orphanage, to me, it's better. So then I was more emotionally prepared to be able to handle the information, because when my brother told me the story and who my birth mom was, it wasn't pretty. And
Now, what
so
you mentioned that, you're glad in some way that you waited until you were older to digest all this information, right? Now,
yeah.
looking back on it, when you first heard all of this, do you would you feel comfortable saying at 18 you handled it appropriately, or were you still emotional of the results? I assume probably still emotional, if I'm
I would say I was emotional, because here's the thing: by the time I was 18, and then I was trying to, I was like, oh yes, I got the information. I can finally, now I can find my birth family. I can see who my mom is, because I really struggle with identity and knowing, like, what does my birth mom look like? Do we have the same personality? Like, and so pretty much I was, very curious and stuff. But then when I found out, when I was talking with my brother, that she had passed away, I think that my adopted mom was like, how do you feel about that? And I said, I'm a bit sad, because that does kind of, I really wanted that chance to meet my birth mom, where I know there are a lot of kids that have met their birth mom. And unfortunately, I will not get that opportunity, which is, I mean, it's still hard to this day and everything. But looking at the situation, it's for the better, because she was not in a good place, unfortunately.
right. And that's, your story's not any different than a lot of, adoptees. So a lot of people that are going to listen to your story, they're going to be able to connect with you in that way. And that's what's really comforting, to know that you're not alone. And that's why we have resources like this podcast, for example, to explore the emotions behind it and to connect as being adopted, because being adopted, in my view, is special. And it's special on a lot of different platforms, really. I mean, from an emotional level, in a psychological level, in the relationship between, there's always that question in school that people would dread writing an essay on, do you get your traits from genetics or where you were raised? And that's always a battle that goes back and forth. But anyway, back to your story though. So you were able to find these results. How did you go about obtaining this information? Let's talk about that.
So with VK, as I said, I wrote my
Right,
brother.
right, with VK, yep.
Yep. So then he contacted me back. Then it got to my second oldest brother, who ended up contacting me as well. Unfortunately, just a few years ago, I lost him. He ended up becoming an alcoholic and he passed away as well. But then, so it's actually funny, but with my half sister, who I've been looking for a long time, 2 years ago, actually, it's really cool that there's 23andMe now. I'm telling you, it's so awesome because actually I had no idea, but she ended up doing it, and actually our DNA matched. So it actually connected our DNA. So she wrote me on the 23andMe and was like, "Hey, is your name Svetlana Patashkina?" And
So
then she
this
also,
this connection on 23andMe that you made with your half sister, was she in Russia?
no, she's in America because she got adopted to
Oh,
America.
okay. I was gonna say because that would have been impressive if 23andMe was in Russia. That's cool though. Yeah. So wow. So she did. That's awesome. All right. You
Yeah,
can
so
continue. Sorry, didn't mean to
she,
cut you off. You're on a
no,
roll.
you're good. So she contacted me. She explained her story, basically saying that when I was born, her and my brother, my other half brother, they were adopted together, but they had gotten adopted right as I was born. Now, again, they were put in the orphanage due to the fact that, unfortunately, my oldest brother Dennis had to call the police on my mom, because she was basically abandoning the kids. My grandmother was taking care of the kids, and it was too much. So, actually, during my birth, I was refused in the hospital, knowing that most likely, if she had tried to keep me, I would have been taken away in seconds. But my oldest brother Dennis and then Alexei, the one unfortunately that passed away, they stayed back in Russia because they were older. So they were able to just, I guess survive on their own and get their own place, which I'm actually surprised. But then Eileen, who was Olga, and then Zane, who was Vyacheslav. It's a bit confusing. And then us three were adopted due to my birth mom being the alcoholic and knowing that it was just too much. You know how Russia was then. It was just too much.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, not a lot of conditions improved to an extent. I mean, it's gotten a lot better. I mean, we made progress. Russia finally, in I think 2012, 2011, said beer's no longer a soda, a soft drink anymore. So
Yeah.
they're slowly making progress, but it's still pretty rough in certain parts.
Yeah.
So once you got this information, let's talk about how you shared this information with your adoptive parents and like what extent did you share? Did you share everything? Did you go bits and pieces? Did you open up like at once? Let's talk about how you processed this information and built up the courage to kind of share to your family and friends about this.
So
Or
for me
or if you
personally,
or if you held this information together for a while before you felt comfortable.
So for me, because adoption is a big identity thing, you got to realize when you're kind of missing that other half. Like, I don't know. For me personally, being adopted, like, and then when you see people that have, like their biological parents, but then you don't, it can be very painful. I know for me especially. But when I found out that I had found Dennis and Alexi, I was so thrilled because in a way that brought some closure. Here I'd been looking for a long time and I'd been curious. So I immediately told my parents. They actually were very excited for me. They thought that was really exciting and they really were like, "Oh, you got to talk more." And like they were just very like basically wanted me to just like share what has been happening and share my story. And like what they asked me so many questions and they were like, "What happened with your birth mom and your siblings?" And they found it to be very interesting. And same with my friends. I definitely have friends. When I shared like my story on Facebook, I mean, people were just so thrilled. They were writing me, "This is so exciting. I know that this is something huge for you," which it was.
Yeah, now,
So
well, without a doubt, I mean, it's always a big step, and it's funny because You can tell me if this happened to you growing up or not, but I've spoken to quite a bit of adoptees, and it turns out as we get older and like through our childhood years, it seems like the majority, again, this isn't a fact, this is just my opinion speaking, but it seems like the majority of a lot of the adoptees growing up are like, yeah, I'm adopted, but it's not a big deal. And it's our friends that really took more of an interest in it than we did. Because at least from a personal experience, like my friends loved the fact that I was from Russia. I remember like it was yesterday, I was driving in a car with two of them, and out of the blue, a good friend of mine named Corey, he just asked me, he's like, yo, Dave, straight up, if the US and Russia got in a war, would you fight for Russia or would you fight for the US? And I'm like, where's this coming from? I'm like, oh, well, America, of course. But anyway, but I don't know. So back to you, because this is all about you. All about Kelsey. So, when you told your family, you told your adopted parents, you kept them up to date with everything. At what point did you kind of stop sharing information to them, or did you ever stop, or do you still to this day like to talk about it, or has your interest changed over the years? Like, let's talk about the progression, because usually there's that, you find that connection, everyone gets excited, you have those glory years, and then it kind of just, sometimes it fades away, sometimes you lose contact for a couple years. But let's talk about kind of like let's talk about the flow of your relationship with your Russian relatives a little bit.
It's actually very interesting, but when I first met Dennis online and all that, it was really neat. But Russian people can actually be very nice. Everyone's like, oh, they're so mean. I'm like, Russian family.
They just don't the big difference is Russians think it's weird that Americans on the street smile at each other, because in Russia, when you smile at someone, it's because they're a friend or a family member. That's it.
Exactly.
They don't do it to strangers. It's not because we always look mean when we're just sitting here with a straight face. That's just our face. I mean,
exactly.
That's
I just recently took 100%. A picture with my brother, and I'm so straight faced, and I was like, but that's how the Russians look. Like, everyone tells me all the time, you look angry. No, it's because this is how we're. And then think about it. If you look back at your adoptive photos, I'm not joking, in the orphanage, are you smiling? Your answer is going to be no.
Yeah, no, and honestly, I hate to say this, Russian children are way more disciplined than American children. When I was on a plane to Russia back when I took that trip, during college, all the crying kids on the plane were Americans. And I hate to say that because I was sitting next to this Russian couple, and they were just like going back and forth with each other like, oh, these Americans, they don't know how to raise kids. They're so undisciplined, and but Russians are interesting people, but they are very hospitable people. That's for sure.
And that's what I was going to share about. So my birth brother, Dennis, he was like, what's your address? And I'm thinking, okay, this is a little weird. But then come to find out, almost for like in the first year, the first month, he sent me all this stuff. And I was so excited because you got to go to the post office, and he was like, oh, you can go to the post office. And it was like legit. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like,
yeah,
sending me all this stuff.
To get a package from Russia. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So much stuff from Russia. And so I think it was really cool because when Russians say family is family, like, I remember Dennis and Alexi, it didn't matter if I was half or full. They were like, your family.
Yeah, family is family. Even if you're like a third cousin, doesn't matter. You're like a brother or sister immediately.
You're just family to them.
Yeah, and I love that about the Russian culture and the Russian people. And, I've spoken to my adoptive mom about this a couple of times. I said, I think it's kind of sad that, at least, I'm just talking about my family, but how many times a year do you talk to your uncle and aunt? It's like, oh yeah, whenever I see them, someone getting married or someone died. And I know that sounds really mean, but it's like, you shouldn't be, I don't know. Family is supposed to be important, and obviously that's a whole nother topic that we're not going to discuss. But
yeah, exactly.
Because we're talking about adoption, not family drama and whatever. But so back to your story again. So you mentioned that your parents were excited about the information. You still love sharing about it. Let's kind of rewind a little bit and talk about your adopted parents for a little bit. Let's talk about maybe did they ever tell you why they wanted to adopt a child? What made them go to St. Petersburg? What age? I mean, I think you already said the age. Sorry, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3.
Yeah, it was like about almost 4.
Almost 4. Okay, close enough.
Yep.
So let's talk about your adoptive family. Share whatever you're comfortable with, just to kind of get a little more background story about you. What were you like as a kid? Let's go.
Oh gosh.
Let's get into the funny stories. Yeah, the details.
So actually, this makes me cry a little bit, but it's the fact of you, David. You already know who Ron Stoddard is, and just the fact of my parents.
Very great guy. Very great guy.
He showed a video of me to them, and so he was like, I have a video of a little girl. They didn't want anybody, I don't know, they were like, let's do between the ages of like 3 and 7. So he played some videos, and I remember like I was sitting in his lap, and the second my parents saw me, as they were just like, all right, she's the one. And it was pretty amazing, the fact of when they first saw me, they were like, this is the one.
It's so awesome and powerful how you ask a lot of adoptive parents and they will tell you straight right away.
Yeah.
When we saw you, you are ours. That's it. Done.
Yeah.
And immediately nothing's going to change that. Like, full parent protection mode kicks in immediately.
Exactly.
Like, that's my child. Get him on a plane right now.
Yeah, and it was cool because there's still the pictures of me that when he showed them, they're still on the fridge downstairs to this day. But it's really neat, the fact of, having, it, I know for some people it can be confusing. Oh, this is, with birth family and adoptive parents, between the two, it can be very confusing because, again, I've said it can be an identity issue. And I've been very lucky in the sense of I have a good relationship with my adoptive parents. I was a very easygoing kid. Of course, I was whiny, but like we were talking about with
still
kids
are.
Still
I'm
are.
just kidding.
Yes,
Kelsey,
I'm still whiny. So I was very fortunate to not have too much trauma growing up. I actually had a very good relationship with my adoptive parents growing up, and I was a very overall happy kid. I was definitely had a good life growing up, and I mean, I was always like, again, we'll kind of go back to the beginning. I was always told I was adopted, but I never fully understood it until, again, I was older, and then I realized, oh wow, like this makes more sense in what happened and why I got refused in the hospital. And so
I'm going to ask a deep question. All right.
Sure.
What do you think your life would have been like if you were never adopted?
I actually, what's funny, David, is I tell people this all the time, but I've had this conversation with a few people recently, and if I hadn't been adopted, I think I would have been on the streets. I most likely would have gone into drinking, and there's a very good chance I would have gotten into, I'm sorry, I'm going to say the word, but I would have probably gotten into prostitution. Who knows what would have happened with me.
Okay, that's well, there's a first for everything on this podcast, but hey, people like your honesty, so I appreciate that.
I mean, it's just unfortunately drugs and drinking were,
it's very very common. I mean, I think what's the age when the orphanages
isn't it 6?
I think it is 16. They basically say you can no longer stay here, and 2/3 of them end up drinking, drugs, prostitution. Yeah, it's not a good outcome. So
no, it's really sad.
It is. But the fact that you were given that second chance, that's why you're here, and that's why we're here to talk about it. And being adopted it's not something that goes away. It's a part of you for the rest of your life.
It is.
And some people are more affected than others. There are also serious concerns about medical information, and we can talk about that next. Were you ever bothered by the fact that you didn't know family medical history?
So yes, that was a big factor for me. That even still to this day, now having 23andMe does help, but it's not, that's not a guaranteed thing. I mean, you can't put your trust in the internet, But actually, that was a big issue. I was cross-eyed when I first came, severely.
Yep, me too. Me too.
I had parasites from the orphanage because I don't know if it was the food or water but it definitely affected me. So I was delayed. And then I was very small. I was only 20 pounds when I was 3 years old. So definitely, unfortunately, I definitely had some health issues growing up, which I definitely had to overcome. So even I remember when I was younger and stuff, I was like, well, I wonder what if my family had anything. And then even like when I was 18, I was like, all right, I'm just going to get my blood work checked to make sure that nothing's out of the ordinary and then with 23andMe, it actually, some of it, I mean, most of it, it's pretty accurate. So it does kind of give you that closure. I try to talk to dentists, but because of the Russian and the English, the translation is a little bit harder. From what it sounds like, the health was okay. He didn't like go into detail about like what genetically is passed down or anything. So that's still always going to be questionable. But I mean, that was definitely with the health stuff. Yeah, that was a big question for me for sure.
Right. Yeah. And I know you and I were just talking about this last week, how I'm currently undergoing the treatment for H. pylori,
Yep.
which is a very common, as my doctor, I didn't even know I had this my whole life. It's a very common bacteria that you get from being born abroad. That's basically what my doctor told me. It's very common for people not from the US, and luckily the antibiotics wipe out your system, but you're gonna, hate your body for 2 weeks until it's over with. But
I had it too, so you're not alone.
Yeah, I know. Apparently a lot of people have gone through that fun experience where they become best friends with their bathroom. So
yep.
that's right. So let's talk about your Russian family a little bit. You talked about your half siblings, your biological mother. Did you make any contacts with anyone else? Cousins, grandparents, uncles, aunts? Anyone on the father's side or
no? So I cannot seem to find anyone on my father's side. Like I'm not quite sure. Like, all right, again, on the Russian papers, I don't know if you noticed, but the names can be made up. So my brother and I had a conversation about this where he said that the birth father's name was fiction. So basically, there's a very possible I don't know the situation, again, with my birth mom. So I don't know if she just didn't want me to know who he was, or I don't quite understand I don't quite understand the details, and I'm just kind of like, I am so questionable about that. Like, I would kind of like to see, because then I might have cousins and aunts and all that on that.
Well, I mean, have you ever thought about asking your sibling, Dennis, hey, do you know any cousins? Any aunts or uncles? I'm sure he probably would know something about at least what happened to like his grandmother or.
So my grandmother passed away, both my grandmother and grandfather.
Okay.
My birth mom was an only child.
Oh.
So
small family. Okay.
Yeah, it's very small. So that's why I was like, I'm curious of if my birth father's is bigger or not, or just it's always again that questionable.
Yeah, that's challenging, especially if the biological mother or a lot of her relatives are not around anymore, because who else would know the guy that was your biological father? So that's definitely difficult. I can see why that's going to be challenging to try to dig up any information. So I assume you haven't been back to Russia, is that correct?
I have not, unfortunately. I would love to go.
You would love to go?
I would absolutely love to go, because again, for me being from another country, it would bring some closure, and I can say, hey, this is where I was born. Like, I was in Russia for 4 years, my first 4 years of life.
Do you have
That's
any memories of Russia?
I unfortunately do not.
Okay.
No, I unfortunately, it's everyone, even people ask me, do you have memories? And I said, no, I don't, unfortunately. Just the pictures. There were a lot of pictures, so I kind of just go based off that. I mean, in the pictures, I look happy. Who knows? Like,
Maybe you were forced. We don't know. Yeah. No, I'm
we
kidding.
don't know.
So if you were to travel back to Russia, what are some things you'd want to see?
Well, if the hospital was still there, I would absolutely love to see where I was born. I hear St. Petersburg is an absolute beautiful city, and so it's
Yes.
historical. It's
It
known
is the World War II, the history
Yep.
defending Stalingrad.
Yep.
It was where the beloved president of Russia was the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, I believe, and then was a KGB officer in East Germany. And then when the Berlin Wall collapsed, he probably went home and cried about it. And now that he's president, he wants to try to reunite the whole entire Soviet Union, and we all know how that's going. So that's a different story. But anyway, so you'd see the hospital, you'd want to go see your orphanage.
Yeah, and then I would love to see, I mean, if I still have the address on my papers of where my birth mom, where she first lived. So
you could potentially go there and maybe ask neighbors. Maybe some of the older neighbors may know who your biological mother was and could talk about what she was like. At least that could give you some sense of what type of person she was.
Yeah, so I think that would be really cool to go see, for sure, to just kind of see where she came from and everything. And I mean, I'd love to go see where I came from.
Now, so we talked about a lot of positives, mostly about adoption and your story and everything. A few negatives, being some family members are no longer around to get answers from. Is there anything in particular about being adopted that has affected you to a point that you have a little bit of resentment about it? Meaning that you blame maybe, well, if I wasn't adopted, I wouldn't have this problem. Because lately it seems that, and, correct me if you feel differently, but, over the last 10 years we've been talking, right? How many times do you think we've been asked by someone writing a paper about adopted children, and they want to know if we have health problems, they want to know if we have anxiety, do we want to know if we feel abandoned, do we have identity issues? It seems people like to study people who are adopted, and I'm just curious what your take is about all that.
So I was having a conversation again with somebody about this today, and there is a lot of, unfortunately, there are negatives with adoption. Like I said, one of my issues is identity. I would like to know who my birth mom was. I do want to know what she was like. Do we look alike? Do we act alike? So there are, and then another issue, I would definitely, I hate to say it, is anxiety. That's a big one. I know a lot of people that are adopted, like, I have anxiety and depression. I said, think about where we come from. We come with a lot of baggage. I hate to say it.
I was going to say, Kelsey, don't try too hard to paint a picture over there. Jeez. But I mean, no, I'm kidding. But your comment is pretty spot on about anxiety. It's safe to say in the last 10 years, and just a little background, everyone, again, Kelsey and I have been chatting and getting to know each other for 10 years. She was one of the top 5 to 10 people that literally started and was on the Facebook group Russian Adoptees, and that grew to, I don't know how many members we have now, 2,000 something.
2,000,
yeah, but she was one of the original people. I think she's like 004 or something. I don't know. But so, I mean, I feel like a lot of people have anxiety. I mean, anxiety is a big part of everyday life now. I think to an extent, it's safe to say most people have some form or have experienced some form of anxiety in their life. Now, do adopted children have more anxiety based on being relocated? based on maybe the lack of the mother's touch for the first few years. There's a lot of studies about that, and I will say I struggled a lot personally with anxiety, years and years, and I didn't really know how to cope with it. It got worse, and I tried therapy out, and some therapists just wanted to obsess about adoption because they really believed that every rooted issue was all about my adoption. And it's like you could tell them, why are you here today? And it's just like, I don't know, I'm gonna complain about the weather. Oh, it's because you're from Russia. Yeah, it makes sense. It's like that no. The color blue is the color blue. It's like, it's not purple. But so what's your take on anxiety? You said that it's affected you. To what extent did it affect you, and how did you manage that? If you're comfortable sharing them, of course.
I'm gonna also speaking on the negatives, I did want to share something which might help some people.
Sure.
If they listen to this. One thing that I unfortunately, because of me being malnourished and me being 20 pounds, I unfortunately have learning disabilities. And I hear it's not uncommon because of me being in the orphanage, me not getting the nutrients I needed. That's been a huge weight in the sense of when it comes to academics, I would love to grow, but at the same time, it's definitely hard. And of course, having with the anxiety, even to this day, it's not easy. Again, I talk to a therapist. I try to talk to my friends who I can trust. And also when you talk to each other, like if you can talk to another adoptee and say, hey, do you have this? How, when you can relate to somebody, it can take that burden off the chest. Like, oh my gosh, finally I feel relieved in the sense of somebody understands me and I'm not alone. Because with it, there are times I feel alone. Even with my anxiety, we don't know what to do. Like, we go to therapy, we might get on medication, but then we try to, and then we don't know who to talk to. And then, I don't know, sometimes you're going in circles, and then you're I know for me, sometimes I'm going, okay, is it because I know it's my adoption? And then you kind of start going back and you're trying to figure it all out. And sometimes it's not exactly trying to figure it out, it's finding the right person to talk to, or like, even a therapist, or like me talking to David, or I don't know. That's an example.
Oh boy.
Hey, we've been friends for 10 years, so no, don't even go there.
Okay. No, I know. I mean, who else benefits from 2 a.m. calls from me? I mean, geez. Those are always the best calls. We got down and talked about all the good conversations. And
but see, that's the benefit of having a adoptee friend. When you are going through something, you can get the weight off your chest.
Exactly. And that's something that when you are growing up, especially in your adoptive family, when it comes to issues that you think are adoption related, or hey, I'm going to go search for my birth family, I wish somebody out there could understand what I feel like right now, because they don't. People who aren't adopted don't sometimes realize how much information that they get, how much health information they get. They get to sit across the table and look each other in the eyes and say, oh, look, that's my mother's eyes. And for people who are adopted, like, that's special stuff for us. Like, the first time, whenever an adoptee reconnected with their family and they saw a photograph of their sister or brother or mother or father for the first time, they just, my experience was I just froze and looked at it for a long time. And it's like, whoa, it's like you're staring at a mirror and seeing yourself, and that kind of makes you just stop for a moment and question a lot of things. And as I get older, I mean, it gets more complicated as time goes by. And what I always tell people is don't let being adopted ruin yourself negatively, because everyone has their own opinion, of course, but I think adoption is beautiful. I think it's a good thing. In some ways, most of us are better off in the United States. Some people might think differently, and that's their experience, and they have the right to have that opinion. But that's just my little 2 cents. But back to Kelsey, because that's why we're here. So Kelsey, you obviously right now is not the best time to travel to Russia due to the current political situation. But when do you hope to get over there? 5 years from now?
Oh,
ASAP,
I
10
hope sooner than
years?
that. No,
Tomorrow,
I mean,
next week?
I
You
would,
want to book a flight next week?
yeah, why not? Well, I'd love to go to Russia in no time.
Did you renew your passport? Your
No,
Russian
so I have to
passport?
go. I have to go
Okay.
to the DC embassy, and I gotta like fill out all the information, and I still have my original. So I think it just
Yep.
comes down to actually filling out the
Right.
information and getting approved.
Okay. Yep. Yep. That's the two-step process. It's the citizenship verification and then the actual passport itself. But I'm sure you can accomplish that. So before we kind of wrap things up, I'll let you kind of tell us about right now, present day. Let's talk about Kelsey today on April 10th. What are you up to with your life? What do you want to do? What inspires you? What do you like to do? Just tell us about yourself.
So, I mean, how do I put it? All right. So basically, a little bit about myself. I work in a hospital, nothing exciting. I'm a patient care tech. I help people take care of them when they're really sick, and it can be fun. It's a learning experience. I'm working on getting my EMT, emergency medical technician, basically my EMT card. Trying to get through the national registry, though, is just disastrous. So that's a whole nother process, and that's another story for another day. But I do horseback ride. Um, I did that. I've been doing that since I was 12, and that's very therapeutic. So definitely find hobbies because that definitely can help. I did violin for almost 6 years, which is one of the hardest instruments to play, and I was able to accomplish it. Um, so that was pretty significant. I was homeschooled, which I know everyone's like going to ask me, "Oh, did you have any friends? Like, did you isolate in your room all the time?" No, I did have friends. I did go out. Do not worry. Um,
No one's worrying, Kelsey. You have plenty of friends. We know. And hey, if
um,
all else fails, at least you had me for 10 years.
exactly. And then I'm now a part of the Voice of Adoptees podcast, which is pretty awesome. This is a very big accomplishment. I think this
That's
is going to
true.
be able to help people in the long run when they can hear our own voices versus the media. I was sharing this in a meeting, but I said, when you're texting, the way the words come out, just it can be very confusing. But then when you hear people's voices, it makes a big difference. It's like it's eye-opening. You're like, oh my
It's
gosh,
yeah,
somebody does
it's
understand me.
you're hearing the raw emotion from people and they're actually passionate about what they're talking about and they're not making this stuff up. Like, you know, you text someone something. I mean, if I texted one of my good friends right now and said, "Hey, I video chatted my birth mother and I'm about to have a breakdown because I have no idea what's happening," they're going to be like, sorry? Question
Yeah,
mark.
exactly.
So, and honestly, I wouldn't do that. I'd, go to someone who was adopted right away and talk to them. I mean, I just made a post on the Russian Adoptees Facebook page about talk to my birth mom tonight for 3 hours, and I'm still kind of a wreck over that. To be honest, it's crazy, but that's my story will come one day. I mean, I know a lot of people's heard it a million times, but it's always progressing as most relationships do in life. They progress, whether it's for good or not. Time's the answer on that. So,
And
um,
always look as your adoption as a blessing, even though we come with a lot of baggage. And I hate saying it like that, but I'm sorry, it's true. But at the same time, we come with a lot of blessing. And I know people are like, oh, well, it's such a negative. It's not. It's just, it's obstacles we have to overcome. But when you talk to the right people, then it does make a difference in having the right relationships as well.
absolutely, I agree 100%. I think you nailed that last part beautifully by just reminding people that, hey, everyone has a story. At the end of the day, everyone has a story. But rather than dwell on the past and dwell on the negative, focus on the future, focus on yourself, and try to find any positivity that you can. And maybe your story isn't as nice or pretty flowers as someone else's, but at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We all have to exist on this planet peacefully. And that's just, sometimes you have to take it a day at a time. And I think we're learning that as we get older, that our roots might have begun somewhere else, but we are now at a different phase in life where we can be comfortable with who we are while we're still trying to figure out who we are. But life is literally a lifelong learning experience. Try to say that 20 times fast. But I strongly believe that. So is there any last comment you'd like to make, Kelsey, before we wrap it up?
So, yes, I want to encourage any adoptee who hears this, please do not be afraid to share your story. I know it can be very scary being recorded and you might think you're being judged. But if you think about it, nobody has the right to judge you because we've all been through the same thing. And that's why we're doing this, is to help each other. So please,
absolutely.
please.
I'm far off from ever judging anyone. I'll be the first person to admit that I've made a lot of mistakes, and believe me, I've made a lot. So,
and that's why we're doing this, is to help each other and help each other grow. So and please,
that's what we plan to do. Yeah.
And if you want to, you can go ahead and schedule with us. Do not be afraid. It's definitely a very good experience. And I think this is going to grow in the years to come.
Absolutely. Well, Kelsey, it's been a pleasure having you on tonight, as always. I'm sure we're going to see you again soon. For everyone listening, that was episode number 2. And we're only on the first week of existence as a podcast. We're finally approved on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and Google Podcasts, as well as Amazon's as well. So that's that. Thanks for tuning in and stopping by. We really appreciate it. I hope that this podcast was helpful. I hope that it was meaningful. And I hope that you spend some time to really reflect on yourself, reflect on your friends, and especially reflect on your adoption story. It's a part of you. It's never going to go away. And you might as well figure it out now, because it will be with you forever. Thanks again for stopping by. And as always, remember, if you want to be interviewed and share your story with us, visit us at www.voiceofadoptees.com. Voice of Adoptees. Who am I?
Thanks for listening to Voice of Adoptees. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. See you next time.